Hi, this is David Humphrey. Welcome again to the War's Agenda. We're going to begin something new tonight. We've talked to you about, or mentioned occasionally to you about the book that you see before you, Dark Things. Well, tonight we're going to begin reading from that book. It's a book that lays out in an inspirational supernatural thriller the principles of spiritual warfare, effective spiritual warfare. And I was impressed by the Lord to do it in a way that would be not merely entertaining, but educational. So tonight we begin the reading of our book, Dark Things. Dark Things by David Humphrey Sr. Read by the author. Theme scripture for the book Dark Things. The angel of the Lord encampeth round about them that fear him and delivereth them. Psalms chapter 34, verse 7. Dark Things, chapter 1. The doors exploded to St. Michael's emergency room as if they had been hit by a bomb. Two grim-faced paramedics erupted through the open doors and down the crowded gray corridors at speeds reserved for the dying and for those as good as dead. Patients and doctors alike scrambled out of their way like matadors before a raging bull. Using the gurney as a life-saving battering ram, they blasted through door after door until at last they reached the emergency operating room. The OR's faded and pockmarked green walls stood like ancient sentries overseeing this latest victim of man's inhumanity to his fellow man. The sparse but clean room quietly welcomed this new critical patient with the strong smell of anesthesia, urine, and sweat. Blood lay on an operating table, still warm from the last fruitless attempt to save a life seconds before. The warm pool was quickly sponged away, and fresh taut sheets briskly shrouded the table. Doctors flung aside the straps that secured the unconscious woman and lifted her quickly from the battered gurney to the operating table. They worked feverishly to stop the profuse bleeding and revive her. "All right, we'll take it from here," said Will Jeffries, dismissing the paramedics out of the operating room. "Make sure you swab her out for semen samples for the police," snapped the nurse to her trainee, who obeyed instantly. "Good. Now bag it quickly, mark it, and get back over here and give me a hand." Darting around the operating table like bees in a hyperactive hive, within seconds the young black female was attached to monitors that beeped her weakening condition to the hospital room staff. Dr. William Jeffries studied her declining heart rate on the monitor with quiet dismay, then shouted for an injection of epinephrine. Instantly, Nurse Angeline Winters, gray-haired and in her late 50s, prepared and injected the powerful heart stimulant. Nurse and doctor both watched the monitor and held their breaths. Mildred Hartley was the RN on duty, a flaming redhead in her 40s. She was known to have a temper as fiery as her hair. This pert and attractive ex-Marine DI was also a Vietnam medical vet. She quickly searched the patient's body for obvious and hidden wounds. She ripped open the already torn and bloody blouse, revealing a snow-white bra, now tie-dyed red, the left cup nearly filled with the victim's blood. Mildred surveyed her quickly as she tossed the sodden bra to the side and shouted, "I've got multiple stab wounds here. Looks like 2 near the heart. Let's clean her up and see what else we've got." She barked orders as if she were still a drill instructor in boot camp and expected them to be obeyed just as quickly. And they were. Her shoulder-length red hair snatched back hurriedly into a ponytail, snapped like a red whip as she whirled about, working frantically to keep this woman alive. The stimulant, once given to the patient, still had no effect. Her heart rate fell like a wounded star. Voices shouted information back and forth as they fought desperately for this woman's right to survive. "I've got the bleeding stopped, doctor. Total of 4 stab wounds to the upper chest and 1 to the scalp down to the skull. Bruises on the throat and inner thighs. By some miracle, the stab wounds to the chest all missed the heart, but they're danger close." "Good. Let's hope her luck holds out," said Dr. Jeffries. But he knew they were losing her. He looked at the blood pressure gauge to his left, and his heart sank. "Doctor, her pressure's down to 40/20, said a masked attendant excitedly. "I know, I can see," snapped the young doctor testily. He bit his lip in growing frustration, and the others watched him as they flew about their duties, looking to him for their leadership. He'd been under tremendous pressure of late, working double shifts to cover his bills and expenses from med school, and his mother in a nursing home, who called every day to say how much she missed him, didn't help any either. The guilt of that alone was eating him alive. And the doctor's insurance. It was cheaper trying to pay off the mafia. Sometimes the pressure was just too much. And he felt as fragile as a glass of fine crystal beneath a sky that threatened violent winds and hailstones. Sometimes he felt as if the dam would burst any moment. But still, somehow, with Sam's help, he kept it together. He watched the monitor while he quickly pondered his next move. "Pressure down to 30/10, said a tense voice, trying to remain calm. The monitor stared back at him, reflecting all the victim's depressing vitals. She was sinking fast. "Nurse, give her another shot." She quickly and efficiently obeyed. Nothing happened. Nothing. They worked another 20 minutes to no avail. "I don't understand. Nothing's working," he said aloud, half to himself. He wished Sam were here. "Her body's not responding to anything. It's almost as if she lost the will to live," remarked the young intern, a lot louder than he had intended. Jeffrey shot him a cold stare. The young man quickly wilted under the piercing gaze. The body was a machine, nothing more, as far as the young Will Jeffries was concerned. Fix the machine, and you fix the problem. The will, the soul, the psyche, and all of the so-called spiritual aspects of life had absolutely nothing to do with it. For Dr. Will Jeffries, there was no room for philosophy, conjecture, or anything else that couldn't be proven by medical science in his operating room. He wouldn't have it. He learned that lesson well in medical school. The young intern swallowed hard and quickly looked away to the comfort of his monitor. Jeffrey sweated, pondering what to do next. What would Sam do if he were here? Always solid and self-assured, unshakable. He always held the answers to everything, the right answers. If there had ever been a God in this God-forsaken universe, indeed, he would have been like Sam Hardison. But Sam wasn't here now. He was on vacation. Think, Will, think. Jeffrey stood silent briefly, feeling for all the world like some kind of medical bandit. Somehow he must steal back the life that death was working so fervently to steal from them. He stared at her inert body, a body that now lay perfectly still. Too still, he noted. He glanced up at the monitor to confirm her vitals once more. Suddenly, Virginia Seal's body lifted in a twisted arc and pounded the table violently several times, then slipped into a grand mal seizure. Her slim brown body hammered the table unmercifully, like a jackhammer gone mad or a woman possessed. For several long minutes, they fought to get control of her. The whites of her eyes glowed eerily in the OR's ancient fluorescent lighting. Jeffries and the other staff responded quickly and battled earnestly to hold the unconscious woman down. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over, and the OR felt strangely sullen and quiet. They all breathed a huge sigh of relief as they slowly released her and returned to their positions. Then, abruptly the stillness was shattered again as the monitor erupted into a persistent and unnerving screech. 1 minute after the massive convulsions had stopped, so had the victim's heart. Again the staff exploded into a frenzy of action as the life of Virginia Sills, like water from a broken cistern, began to slip through their fingers and seemed to fade away into the very air around them. Chapter 2. Dark Thoughts. Virginia heard voices as her life slipped away. "Doctor," said a faraway voice, "we've lost all vitals, and she's not breathing." The hospital room erupted into activity. Faintly, as if from the opposite end of a tunnel, she heard a frantic, metallic-sounding voice say, "Code Blue, emergency room. Code Blue, emergency room." And without quite knowing how, she knew they were talking about her. Two young nurses new to the ER whispered furtively to one another as the others worked frantically to revive the comatose woman. "I don't think she's going to make it," said short, petite, blonde-haired Kathy Starks. The pert young Peter Pan lookalike was rotating out today to Capitol Hill General Hospital. "I don't either," responded slender Andrea Robbins, both unaware they were overheard clear as a bell by Mildred Hartley, who instantly shot them a look that could wither stone. They also were heard by Virginia Sills. "Is it true? Am I as good as dead? Never to see my mother and father again? Never to prove my father wrong about what he said to me? Is this it?" pondered Virginia. "No," said a powerful, thunderous voice in her ear, in direct opposition to the others. A voice, it seemed, that only she could hear. It continued, "It is not yet your appointed time to die." The voice was emphatic, almost angry, as if it knew a defined secret the other voices did not. Jeffries was already up on the table, straddling Virginia's body, pumping the chest rhythmically, sweating profusely. Blood, like red tears, streamed from the chest wounds with each powerful push of his hands. He called loudly for the defibrillator. The room had become a mass of confusion as doctors and nurses poured in, wanting to help save this unknown woman. Surprisingly, among them came senior staff cardiologist Samuel Hardison, a huge bear of a man. He pounded into the room, casting his topcoat aside, buttoning his hospital coat up over his $1,200 navy blue Canali suit. Back one day early from his vacation, he had walked through the hospital doors but moments before when the code blue call came. "What's the status here?" he shouted above the melee at Jeffries. "I can't lose another," Jeffries thought to himself as he continued his rhythmic pressure. "I just can't." "Will!" Will looked up suddenly, startled and relieved to see his mentor and friend back. He would know what to do. He would save her. "I thought you were—" "We'll talk later, Will. Right now, status." "Rape victim, Sam," he shouted, swallowing hard as its huge friend pulled alongside to help. Blood pressure dropped to 30/10. Grand mal, then cardiac arrest. Shame, what a lovely girl, noted a young blonde nurse quickly, her eyes taking in the bruises on the otherwise attractive face. The face was surrounded by a dark waterfall of black hair that now lay tangled and matted with congealed blood. The young blonde was rotating out of St. Michael's today also, and was glad of it. Just too many gunshot wounds, stabbings, and drug overdoses, she thought to herself. St. Michael's was the charity hospital, so they always got the worst cases, the one nobody else wanted, or the ones that had questionable coverage. No time for chatter, snapped Mildred to another young trainee who tried to join in the whispery conversation. Help me with this darn machine. A young Carolyn Hodge, an x-ray tech just getting off from duty, rushed into the ER, hoping to be of some help. She was nervous and a little unsure of herself. Nevertheless, she darted to the older woman's side and lent a hand. She too became swept up in the swirling frenzy to save this dying woman's life. This was her first week working at St. Michael's, and the atmosphere was electric. This was her first time working in an inner city hospital, and it was an arena of constant excitement. Her heart was pounding a river of adrenaline through her veins. It was awesome to think that someone's very life was in her hands, that whether this person lived or died depended on what she did or didn't do. Her brown eyes flashed with excitement. This was so cool. Meanwhile, Jeffries continued to pump frantically and to brief Sam at the same time, his words now coming in strings of hurried gasps at odds with the rhythm of his strong hands upon her chest. They found her in an alley. Deep shock. Where's that defibrillator? I can't keep this up much longer. It's still not working. There it is. Clear, shouted the fiery head RN as she extended him the two paddles. Sam, Jeffries gasped weakly, barely above a whisper. It sounded almost like a forlorn prayer, and Jeffries looked imploringly at his mentor. He didn't have to say any more. Jeffries jumped down from the table, and Sam shot past him like a sprinter in the Olympic track and field competition. He snatched up the two high-powered paddles from Mildred, who yielded instantly and melted away to other vital duties. I've got it, Will. Take a break, ordered the older, more experienced doctor. Will always marveled at how swiftly, expertly, and confidently Sam worked. He was awesome to watch. Well, she was in God's hands now. His God, Samuel J. Hardison, the only God he knew. Exhausted from his intense 30-minute dance with death, Will collapsed against the nearest wall for support. His handsome black face was glistening and pained, his shirt and white coat soaked with fresh sweat, his chest heaving from the effort as Sam shouted in his deep baritone voice, Clear! He slammed the two paddles on Virginia's chest, and inside of her body, 650 volts of electricity blew arced to her tired and weary heart. Her body convulsed from the power, heaved itself off the table, and back down again, as still and silent as death itself. Clear! Shouted the tall, gray-haired black heart specialist again. He would not be denied. She must live. Zzz. The bolt of primal power pounded the heart muscle, slamming it with elemental surge of energy that seemingly could not be denied. But death's grip was at least as strong as this powerful force of nature, and death seemed to be the one force that would not be denied this day. Give me 20 cc's of epinephrine. But Dr. Hardison, she's already had. Now, nurse! Yes, doctor. Right away. My God, please don't die, whispered Angeline, almost moved to tears by the woman's pitiful condition, strangely moved by this single tragedy out of the hundreds she saw daily. She clasped the tiny crucifix around her neck and squeezed it so hard that she thought the metal might break. Her lips silently mouthed the words again that her heart prayed in secret. Please, God, don't let her die. Unseen in the far corner of a crowded room, a small shadow seemed to twitch and wince, as if in pain, then scurry away. Virginia slowly opened her eyes and looked around her. She didn't hurt anymore, she noticed. All the pain was gone. Excruciating pain that had plagued her head, chest, legs, abdomen, and beyond. Where, where was she? The commotion and shouting of the hospital room echoed strangely beneath her. She looked down. There on the table, surrounded by an army of doctors, nurses, and worried-looking attendants, some 20 feet below was she, or rather, her body. Oh my God, she said to herself, I'm dead. No, said a deep voice from somewhere above and behind her. Not yet. She had heard that voice before, telling her, yeah, it said that she couldn't die. Not yet. That's correct. I said that to you. And it is true, Virginia. Not yet. It is not your time to die. She whirled around to see the speaker. He stood above her in midair, where the high hospital ceiling should have been. But there was nothing, only space, broad, empty, boundless, and dark. He was dressed in a broad-shouldered white robe, over which he wore an engraved solid gold breastplate. The white robe was cinched at the waist, with a wide and what must be priceless engraved gold belt. From it hung a long golden scabbard and sword. It too was engraved with the same strange letters as the belt. Strange yet soothing letters that seemed to move when she tried to focus on them. He stood with massive arms folded, looking at her as if perturbed by something. His skin was dark and golden, an eye-appealing shade of tan gold. She'd never seen anything like him before. His hair was glistening, dark, wavy, and golden. Shoulder length, it shimmered as he moved, and she gasped, fascinated. His features were sharp and chiseled, almost sculpted. A strong jaw, prominent forehead, and deep-set eyes. He was stunningly handsome. His eyes pierced her soul. They were dark and brooding purple, like magnets. They drew her into them. She thought about all the stories she'd heard in Sunday school as a child and had dismissed as she grew older. Her mom had taught her about the good Lord. Maybe Mama wasn't so out of touch after all. But then doubt, like an insidious weed, sprang up in her mind. Maybe she was just having one of those out-of-body experiences that scientists say is brought on by oxygen deprivation. Was there such a thing as God? Who was right? She became even more frightened and confused. After several minutes, she found her voice and began to speak. Are you, she queried nervously, God? The sternness seemed to leave his face for a moment and spread into a slight smile of tolerance for her naivete. Amazingly, his eyes flashed golden, the pupils reflecting his amusement, their color changing briefly to match the color of his skin. Virginia gasped again, captivated. No, I am not the Holy One. Glory and honor be to his throne, he said, bowing his head slightly, in seeming reverence at the mention of the Supreme Being. Are, she swallowed hard, are you Jesus? She said hesitantly. No, I am not the Blessed One, though glory and honor be unto his name. Again, the reverent nod of the head. Who are you then? I am Mahatiel, your personal guardian angel. It was then that she saw the wings, neatly folded, graceful, rounded, large feathered curves that appeared over each shoulder. How could she not have seen them before now? My God, you're an angel, she said in hushed awe. He frowned at the casual use of his creator's name, his eyes flashing white for a moment in obvious displeasure, but he said nothing. Unfortunately, using the creator's name so frivolously was a rude habit developed by humans and encouraged by dark things over the centuries. You must go back now, he said gently but firmly. But I don't understand. What's happening? Suddenly he stiffened. She saw his whole expression change so quickly that it alarmed her. He stared off into the distance, and his face became like stone. His eyes became a smoldering green. She followed his fierce gaze, but saw nothing, only blank and empty space. While he was distracted, she looked down at herself. She was dressed in some type of off-white gown. She touched it. It felt cool and smooth to her slim fingers, and for some reason, it seemed to give her comfort to stroke the bead-like material. You must go back, and you must go back now, he said without looking at her, without moving his eyes for even a moment. It was as if he were watching something off at such a great distance that it strained even his eyes to see it. Or was it that he found it so disturbing that he couldn't look away? But who are you? And what's your name? And how did I get here? And humans. He had tried to be patient, but I have told you my name already, but there's no more time for talk, he shouted in a voice that demanded immediate silence and instant obedience. Her eyes, his eyes, changing back to a compassionate gold again, now looked deeply into hers. She trembled for a moment in fear, confused about everything going on around her. Then her mixed black and Irish American blood began to rise to the surface. It was an old habit from childhood, and she knew it was a bad one. But she couldn't help it. Whenever she got frightened or dismayed, she got angry. She was starting to get her ire up. Just who did he think he was? Her father? No, I do not think I'm your father, he remarked tersely, interrupting her thoughts. Then he descended several feet to her level and took her gently but firmly by the arm. It was then that she noticed how huge he was, incredibly tall and powerfully built, more than any man she'd ever seen. His bare arms were massive coils of thick and rippling muscle. She thought at one time that there couldn't be anyone in the world more gorgeous than John, but I am your angel, Virginia. You are in mortal danger. They come, those that seek the dead and the dying. Your life is forfeited if you do not listen to me. I am sent here to keep you alive if you will hearken unto me. Return to your body immediately. We must get you back into your body before they arrive. These are they who smell death and seek to come and claim that which has not already been claimed by him who was and is to come. They seek you, Virginia, and are on their way here now. So come, Quickly, he repeated again. You're you're able to read my thoughts, Virginia said, blushing with sudden realization. Who's coming? And what are you talking about? They can smell. Virginia, listen to me. They tried to kill you before, and they will try again and again until they succeed. Therefore, we must get you back. Now come with me, he said firmly, his eyes flashing purple determination. He pulled her back down into the hospital room, to hover just above her bruised and battered body. They tried to kill me before, she said, puzzled, and will try to do it again. Then it hit her like a punch in the stomach. At the exact same moment, she looked at her limp and wounded form on the table. She gasped as the flood of revolting memories came racing back and dashed like breakers over her being. She had been raped. Her hands flew to her mouth in horror, as if to cover a silent scream. She backed away from Mahatiel and snatched herself free of his powerful grip. Above them, in the distance, there was an uncanny rustling sound. Mahatiel felt deeply for her. He sincerely sympathized with her pain. But each moment she remained outside of her body, she put them both in increasing danger from those that hunt the undecided. She was unaligned, unprotected, and unmarked, had not declared herself for either side, and by that she defaulted and made herself fair game. They would rip her soul apart as they dragged her down to hell. He didn't want to see that. Virginia, come! He extended his hand. She gaped at the hospital floor in horror, reliving in her mind's eyes the event that had happened but hours before. Virginia, come! He said, reaching desperately, the desperation showing clearly in his voice. He, like the young black doctor leaning against the wall, had recently lost a soul in this deadly game of life and death. And again, he too felt that he must not lose another. The screams. He couldn't stand the screams. And as an angel, he heard them forever. The rustling sound grew noticeably louder. Virginia looked up deliberately, past his outstretched and frantic hands, into his eyes. You! How could you just let that happen to me? Her sorrowful eyes nearly broke his heart. However, he didn't have time for this lengthy foray into the land of why, and neither did she. Though he hadn't been responsible for her at the time of the attack, he included himself in his final response to her. Above them, the sound grew nearer, a sound he knew, the flapping of leathery wings. We tried to warn you, he said hurriedly, this morning at breakfast. Still, like most humans, Virginia, you didn't listen then, just as you're not listening now. And the result was tragedy. If you do not listen to me now, the dreadful tragedy you experience today will be nothing compared to the grisly end that awaits you. Now do as I say. Too late. Mahatiel saw them then, in the distance, at the far end of the hospital, swooping low and passing through walls as easily as a dream does through the mind of a sleeper. They sniffed the air, scanning right and left, heading their way. He watched as they flowed through a far room where an old woman sat arguing with her husband over the phone. She fiercely upbraided him for using her new credit card, which had arrived in the mail yesterday. It had been relatively nice and quiet in room 201 North, the cardiac wing. Martha Vincent thanked the Lord that she would be going home tomorrow and was looking forward to seeing her grandchildren. The IVs were out and her heart had responded well to the ACE inhibitors and Coreg. Her frightening bout with heart failure was over, and being a good girl and taking all of her medicine would be the order of the day this time around. She had learned her lesson. Her stay in the hospital had not been that bad. She had made a friend, Frances, the woman in the next bed, who was talking on the phone to her husband. The woman could be a bit testy at times, as sometimes those her age could be, but otherwise she seemed rather nice. "Roger Williams, you old fool, when I get out of here, I'm going to slap you. You know better than to use my new credit card while I'm in the hospital. Why, I ain't even had a chance to use it myself yet," Martha heard Frances say. She watched as the elderly woman fussed and sputtered over the mouthpiece of the phone, flailing her right arm angrily. The glass that contained the woman's dentures went sailing across the room into the opposite wall, shattering both glass and dentures into pieces. A slimy plastic piece of denture with a single tooth attached landed wetly at the foot of Martha's bed. Martha felt concerned for the woman, and after a few moments she tried in vain to get her roommate's attention. "Frances! Frances! Frances Williams, calm down, girl. It's just a credit card. Now calm down. You know what the doctor said. Your pressure—" "You shut up. This ain't none of your business," the woman said fiercely. "And you, Roger, you just wait till I get up out of here and I get home. I'm going to make you wish—" Martha Vincent, embarrassed, fell silent. She put her earphones in her ears and turned up the volume on her TV. She turned her back to the Malay and quietly tried to ignore the rantings of the woman she thought to be a new friend. Gradually, she drifted off to sleep. Adil watched what happened next. The dark things went to the bed of Martha Vincent and sniffed her eagerly. They recoiled instantly. Their nostrils burned as if by sulfur. It was then that they took notice of the Bible that lay on the woman's nightstand. "Not her," one of them whispered. "Let's take the other one." They backed away from Martha Vincent cautiously, then turned their full attention to Frances Williams. Their shadows touched the enraged woman as they circled her. Suddenly, she clutched at her chest, her voice coming in tragic gasps. Sudden pain began twisting her face into an ugly, sputtering mass. Saliva drooled from her mouth as the numbing shadows of the depraved disseminated death into the room like a fine mist in the air. The phone slid from Frances's disabled fingers with a soft thump to the bed, unnoticed by her husband. He held the phone several inches away from his ear. His eyes were padlocked onto the Baltimore Ravens-Washington Redskins game. The picture was bright, beautiful, and stunning on the new 52-inch screen TV. The Skins made an interception on Baltimore's 15-yard line. Rogers' screams of joy drowned out Frances's sputtering outrage. The sudden and brief strangling gurgle at the other end of the phone escaped him. It would be several minutes before he sensed something was wrong. Frances's eyes grew watery, and she struggled for breath that wouldn't come. The massive coronary that shook Frances Williams' body would later be explained as an unfortunate and unexpected tragedy. The hospital monitor dutifully beeped this urgent and alarming message, but it was too late. Carnivorous opportunists, the host of dark things, leaped at this chance to feast on such sweet human misfortune. The rest of the demonic horde wheeled in mid-motion like a single ravenous, multi-winged beast as Frances breathed her last. They waited and watched impatiently as her soul gradually emerged from her body into the strange new world, like a frightened butterfly from the safety of its cocoon. They devoured her instantly, like piranha at a feast. They tore at her, dislodging and devouring large chunks of ethereal flesh. What was left of her, two of the brood dragged downward, screaming, into hell. There, their compatriots would gnaw eternally on the cognizant scraps of her being. Slowly, the other 30 or so dark things turned to follow the trail of the original scent of death that had drawn them here. Montiel knew his time was short, that he had seconds at best. Their chance diversion with the old woman had bought him merely precious moments, not nearly long enough to argue with this stubborn young black woman about the value of her life. He had to act, and act immediately. He thrust the young woman toward her body, violently. Her head whipped backwards from the quick and forceful shove. The moment her soul made contact with her flesh, her body held it fast, like flypaper stuck to an insect. Then hungrily, it drew her spirit being within itself, as if it knew that without it, there could be no life. Though the pull was irresistible, a stunned and angry Virginia Sills still tried to resist. She struggled stubbornly to be free, to continue her debate and inquisition of Mahatiel. The struggle between the two dynamic forces, her body craving life and her soul frustrated and rebellious, resulted in a dramatic slowing of the absorption process. She continued at first to ask him why this had happened to her. Then she demanded to know. She felt all the fury and anxiety exploding within her of everyone who had ever wanted to ask God, why? And though he wasn't there to answer, she was determined that Mahatiel would answer in his stead. Mahatiel was dismayed at the sight of her. Her soul was sinking so slowly back into her body, like a woman fighting the inevitable effects of quicksand. He watched her, counting the seconds and holding his breath. That she didn't understand what was at stake was evidenced by the scowl of resentment on her face as she strove to resist her body's powerful pull on her being. Just then, there was a howl ahead of him in the distance. They had been found. The horde of dark beasts streaked down toward them to reach the girl before her soul slipped back into the safety of his temporal home. Mahatiel steeled himself as dark things launched themselves in his direction in a burst of dark energy. Draped in black cowls, all but one surged in his direction. The remaining one stood pointing at him, his eyes like red coals glowing eerily beneath the cowl's hood. The long, bony, accusing finger, green with ethereal fungus, stabbed accusingly in their direction. Mahatiel glanced down at the woman he was assigned to protect. Her absorption was nowhere near complete. He had to stave them off until all was done. Stubborn girl. She reminded him so much of Kathleen. But she would not end up like Kathleen. By the Son of the living God, he would see to that. His face turned grim, and his eyes a terrifying luminescent green. Furious at their intrusion yet again into the affairs of God and man, he drew his weapon and stood firm to face his enemies. They surged at him like a swarm of malevolent cockroaches, chittering away in their own language. They suddenly encircled him and prepared to attack. They were incensed by the smell of death, like a pack of great white sharks incensed by the scent of blood in the water. They came to feed, and were furious that this one lone angel dared stand in their way. They eyed him resentfully. They were obviously stunned to see him here. What could he want with this one? What could God want with such a person that he would have a guardian angel of this order assigned to protect her? This did not bode well. This did not bode well at all. The information was quickly relayed back to their group leader. He in turn sent one of their number to inform their higher order. This was valuable intelligence, and a ruler would need to be informed immediately. They knew the reputation of this breed of angel. There was something quite different about this particular one, however. He wore the specialized armor of a guardian angel. The spread wings, carved intricately on the front of his breastplate, betrayed that. But his sword was that of an Aryeh, a lion of God, a higher rank of war angel, who were dispatched by the Holy One himself to execute final judgment against the enemies of God. So what was he doing here, dressed as a guardian angel? These angels were known to be incredibly fierce fighters. Thus, no one of their group wanted to be the first to rush in and attack. No, they had best wait for reinforcements. The scent would draw more, and it did. They came from everywhere with anticipation and eager for a feast. They growled like wild animals, resentful that this lone creature of courage stood in their way. They grew more resentful by the minute. Their growing numbers bolstered their courage. They began to press closer. Mahdiel noted that one of their number flew back swiftly in the direction that they had come. To report his presence, no doubt, Mahdiel thought to himself. Then a particular group arrived. He watched these very closely. They were the Kradul, dung eaters, the lowest form of demon spirit. The Holy One had alluded to them once in his word and warned Israel of their existence when he said, "They eat up and feed upon the sin of my people and set their heart on their iniquity." These were sin eaters. Nothing had changed. The same was still true today. These were the bottom feeders, which fed on sin and the spirits of the dead vehemently. They were so repugnant in character that even other demons despised them. They were extremely dangerous and not particularly bright, which made them all the more menacing. While other ranks of demons would pause for fear and weigh their chance for success, this class of spirit is populated by the original fools who would dare rush in. Mahdiel found his perimeter shrinking rapidly on all sides. His sword sang a strange song as he began to weave an intricate pattern with its tip in the air and to pray softly in an angelic tongue, his personal battle language. He prayed for strength and guidance. Opposite him, intensely ferocious appetites guided his growing hordes of enemies, appetites unrestrained by conscience or anything else. They reeked of excess. He knew them well. They had one goal, to kill with expediency. One desire, to savor the fear and torment of their victims. One mind, no mercy, ever. One thought, to please their leader. They moved in unison with but one mind. They lived to kill, to destroy an unaligned soul's very essence, and to intern the rebellious and cognizant remains in torment forever. He watched as they conversed briefly in guttural tones. Mahdiel recognized the speech as pure Hellion. They resorted to this language when they wished to communicate in secret. Mahdiel steeled himself for the onslaught he knew must come. They would not steal this ward, by heaven, not while he was alive. Aye, and he'd give his life, if necessary, to protect this woman and her unborn child. It's been longer than 15 minutes since the last heartbeat. I'm sorry, doctor. I'm afraid she's gone, said Mildred Hartley sadly. The red-headed RN had observed a lot of people expire in the ER over her 21 years of nursing, but for some reason that she couldn't quite explain, this one disturbed her more than most. Dr. Hardison, a pragmatist, after 32 years in his field, didn't give it another thought. The 6'3" giant tossed the two paddles bitterly to the side and said tersely, "Note the time of death as 8:30 p.m." But he hated this part of his job. He took it personally, as if it were a contest between him and death to see who would claim the most. He in the name of St. Michael's and medicine, or death in the name of grief, pain, and suffering. Bah! He needed a drink after this one. For some reason, he felt particularly bad, as if she was supposed to live. But they all were, weren't they? Enough for now. He had his own dance to attend. He left the ER in disgust, heading for a doctor's appointment of his own. "See you, Jeff," he said over his shoulder to his young friend. "Tough loss," he added by way of consolation. But he made sure to avoid all eyes as he plodded from the room, head down. His mind was already troubled by the fog of other things. Will Jeffrey stood in momentary shock. Everyone in the room could feel it, but few wanted to speak for fear of sounding foolish. But she was supposed to live. She was just not supposed to die. Why she more than Mrs. Ellison yesterday or Mr. Klein last night? No one could say or put into words. But it was just not supposed to end this way. But who could stop it? Who could close the chapter on this woman's life other than the way it had? Who? Jeffries thought to himself. Who? Them? The medical profession? Ha! What a laugh. Impotent gods they had turned out to be. They couldn't even cure the common cold, much less stop death head on when it was determined to snatch someone away from this earth as it obviously had this young woman. They were powerless, and for a moment, as never before, he felt as if death himself walked into the room, grabbed him by the throat, and told him face to face that he was utterly useless, that in this never-ending battle he was doomed to lose, again and again. Sure, they saved a few lives. For what? Only to have them die anyway, a few years later. Like Mrs. Gibson, who had had a successful liver transplant after a massive search for a suitable donor, but who died of a surprising and particularly virulent form of lung cancer less than a year later. Or the Jefferson boy, a drive-by victim they had pulled back from the brink of death itself, who overdosed 1 week after leaving the hospital. What was the use? He felt frustration boiling inside of him as he looked at the woman's lifeless body. Attendants and nurses began cleaning up as others flowed from the room, deflated in silent procession, their demeanor a quiet testimony to the tenacity and efficiency of death. He watched silently as Mildred drew the blood-spattered sheet over the woman's head. He slowly took the chart handed him for his signature and final comments. "You did everything you could," whispered Carolyn, touching his arm for a moment, as if the touch might offer some consolation that words could not. But for the young doctor, this was his second failure in 24 hours. He stared straight ahead, teeth clenched. Her words fell on deaf ears. He couldn't take this much longer. His second patient in 24 hours, the fifth one this week. Some were already starting to call him Dr. Death in secret. He had come back to D.C. to make a difference, back to his city, his people, his old neighborhood, to help change things, he'd hoped, for the better. His mentor and father figure, Sam, had encouraged him to. But what good had it done? He'd been back 6 years now and was more frustrated than ever before. Sure, Sam and he had been good friends ever since his years in medical school. In fact, Sam had been his favorite teacher. He'd followed his advice faithfully down through the years, but he felt that even Sam had failed him today. The man whose confidence had been unshakable shook today. He was human after all. He'd seen Sam do medical miracles before, but as much as he looked up to Sam as a medical god, there was definitely no indication of any spark of divinity today. He turned and started from the hospital room. He remembered Mildred's prayer from earlier. Where was a real God when you needed one? A powerful spirit named Belinus, holding the rank of oppressor, arrived. He immediately ordered something tersely in Hellion speech, and 5 demons broke like angry bats to Mahatiel's right. This was a decoy maneuver to draw the angel away from the woman's body, one of many in their arsenal. 5 more moved like swift darts to wedge themselves between Mahatiel and Virginia as he turned to face the first group and defend his right flank. The rest continued to surround the two to prevent any escape and to prepare for what should be a worthwhile kill and feast. Mahatiel, familiar with their tactics, would not budge nor leave his charge. The woman he was assigned to protect. This was a battle that had gone on for eons. It had not begun with the creation of man. It had simply intensified. The stakes were much higher now. Lives were in the balance. After years beyond number and battles beyond count, their initial assault plan was well known to him. Only their superior numbers gave him pause for concern. He remembered an incident from Africa many years ago when he had been assigned to protect a native missionary there. As his charge slept, he had stood guard over the man. He watched with fascination as, in the distance, a daring battle had developed between a young lion, which stood over his charge that night, a wounded lioness, and the ravenous pack of hyenas that had surrounded them both. Hyenas, he noted, would attack and eat anything, even beasts they feared, if their numbers were great enough. Cowards alone, they were ruthless and relentless killers when their bravado was bolstered by the presence of other ravenous members of their pack. He admired the young lion's courage. The beast had fought all night, keeping the jackals at bay, only to find in the morning that his female companion had succumbed to her wounds. And he, valiant but completely exhausted, collapsed. He succumbed perhaps as much from grief as from fatigue, and was rewarded for his gallantry by being instantly devoured. Mahatiel knew now how that brave animal must have felt on that chilly African night, surrounded and outnumbered, a single soul against so many. He recalled a conversation he had had with Uriel several days earlier when he had been given this particular assignment. Help had been offered him, and he had refused it. Mahatiel, his commander, had said to him, this has come from the hand of Michael himself. He requested you for this assignment. A second chance. Yes? He searched the eyes of his commander and friend, and then nodded affirmatively. A second chance. Yes. I won't fail again, Mahatiel had said firmly. Uriel put a comforting hand on his friend's shoulder. All the mistakes of the past are forgotten, he said quietly, and for Mahatiel's ears only. Not all, said Mahatiel, looking down as his jaw tightened. It is said that you were specifically requested by the Holy One for this, Uriel said in whispered tones, hoping to encourage his friend. He moved closer, then continued. Michael was told to assign you. In addition, I know for a fact that he offered no objection to the master's choice. It was felt that you deserved a second chance. You're harder on yourself, my friend, than anyone else has ever been. Also, I and Raphael are available and will help. No help, Mahatiel had interrupted. I must do this myself. His friend's grip had tightened on his shoulder, but the look of sympathy and concern never left Uriel's golden eyes. Mahatiel dropped his eyes in embarrassment as he said, I'm sorry, sir. I did not mean to be so abrupt. But this is something I must do, alone. He looked into his friend's eyes again. I understand, Mahatiel Ben El. Your determination is your greatest asset. But your stubbornness is your greatest point of vulnerability. If you need us, Mahatiel, Raphael and I stand ready to assist you. He then clapped his friend on the shoulder and pointed a scolding finger in his face and said, and if you ever call me sir again, I will chase you across the heavens. He chuckled and continued, you taught me everything I know, my friend, and I told you that I hold this position only until all is well with you again. I feel that this assignment will be the thing that will make all things right for you once more. Uriel stopped suddenly and listened. His face went pale, and he spoke urgently to his friend and mentor. You must leave quickly. Paltiel is already down, and the woman is at the point of death. Her name is Virginia Sills. You know as much as I do at this point, but I'm informed that you will be told more later. Sleen, the striker, leads their attack. There are currently 15 in number surrounding her, 5 controlling the rapist, a man named Pitt. The other 10 are attacking Paltial himself to keep him at bay. Yoel will accompany you for the initial assault and recovery of the girl. He held up his hand as Mahatiel's mouth opened in protest. Orders, he said matter-of-factly, assuming his full authority once more. After that, I promise you, you will be on your own. Yoel will return. The Lord says that there are also 2 lessons that you need to learn during your time on earth. Lessons He's been trying to teach you for a long while. You will learn them during this time. But enough for now. You'll learn more about that later. Here, take your sword and hurry. Godspeed, my old friend. They embraced, and Mahatiel turned and ran swiftly from his old command room with its plush royal blue and gold trimmings and diamond-encrusted windows. He raced down the rich and plush corridors of heaven to the parapet that had led to earth. He immediately had leaped from it into the realm of space with a grace and style like that of an Olympic diver scoring a perfect 10. There was a slight ripple in the sea of time as Mahdiel entered the atmosphere of Earth. Thus had begun one battle, but here he faced another. And in this one, unlike the other, he had exactly what he had wished for. He was entirely alone. The celestial blade hummed in the hand of Mahdiel, as if the sword were eager for battle and hastened to dispense a taste of divine justice. All it took was one dark thing, more adventurous and foolish than the rest. Degal, dweller by the dark stream, was such a one. In a flash, celestial weapon met demonic flesh, and there was a yowl of pain from Degal, the first dark thing foolish enough to rush the gold-skinned angel. A dark and withered hand lay severed, a deadly testimony to the accuracy of the weapon and the skill of its user. First they scattered, then darted at him like a horde of angry cockroaches. Mahdiel's thrusts and parries were like lightning. There were sparks as the weapon bit deeply into the kukri-like blades of the dark hosts. Ting, ting, tang, ting. Heavily steel bit into and clanged its defiance against Hellion iron as the weapons rang out in frenzied testimony to the fervor and rage of the battle. Sparks from the weapon showed in a kaleidoscopic and deadly wonder. This was not going quickly enough, thought Belinus, the newly arrived dark thing. That was one of the sadistic class of higher level evil spirits that all the lower ones feared. They could smell the scent of death, as appealing to them as ever any fine steak was to humans. But the scent was growing fainter and fainter as her soul eased slowly inside her body at the chest. Belinus knew once the head was submerged, the prey would become conscious again. And there was no telling how long it would be before they had another chance like this, where she was so close to death. Unless she committed suicide. He smiled evilly at the thought. A good backup plan, should something go wrong here now. Or they could arrange for her to meet with some unfortunate accident. He frowned. That was always pleasant too, but that could take days, months, or even years to arrange and implement. No, now was their opportunity to strike, and they must seize it. Belinus watched as his hordes ebbed and flowed like a vengeful sea around the two. They flowed forward at a perceived opening, then fell back at the razor cuts of Mahdiel's sun-like sword with its liquid 3-foot arcs. Here it parried a thrust, there it shattered a blade. To clang! As one of the chief ruling dark lords, and regarded as one of the most elite of those who stalked the earth for souls, it had been many years since Belinus himself had joined in active battle. He had become better known for his evil genius for the past many years than his strength. But he had missed the taste of blood in battle. He missed it desperately. His own weapon literally ached and throbbed at his side to get into the fray. It had indeed been a long time since it had tasted the bittersweet wine of blood, a Hellion delicacy. Perhaps you're right, my venomous friend, he said idly to the blade, as if talking to an old friend, and then stroked it gently in its scabbard as if it were the most dear and sensuous lover. We should show our minions how a real son of darkness deals with an intruder into our affairs and domain. Come, let's wet your tongue in angelic blood. Broga! He shouted, and a creature of huge proportions and twice the bulk of Mahdiel lumbered to his side. The head was massive, with jaws that unhinged like a python's and enabled it to swallow its prey whole. Long, hairy, ape-like arms nearly drug the ground, and filthy nails like the claws of a wolverine glistened from constant licking. Like shredders, they were used frequently to rake the captured souls of men, the taste of their fear and misery tangible and delicious. Yes, master, Broga the Terror hissed, snake-like. His blood-red serpentine tongue flicked between his steel-like incisors. Broga, I have a mission for you. The large, pupilless, murky yellow eyes of the creature showed no interest. Would you like to know what it is? Yes, the creature wheezed, as if exhausted from having to move about its huge bulk. But his eyes were still dull and expressionless. Belinus pointed to the angelic maelstrom in the distance, hacking away at his troops, and said, I wish you to destroy that creature. You may have whatever remains of it when you finish. For the first time, emotion registered within the depths of the empty eyes. A deep grunt, like that of a rhino in heat, escaped the creature's lips, and bloodlust shot fire through his veins. Broga, I wish you to rake from that creature the same agony and terror you've raked from the hearts and souls of men. But can you imagine how sweet it would be to rake such from the heart of an angel? Eh? He said cooingly, watching the towering beast's yellow eyes glow with growing hunger and bloodlust. Broga grunted again, louder. Then looked briefly at his master for assurance, like a child with a long-held wish that had finally come true. Belinus smiled lasciviously and nodded his affirmation. Broga stared at the whirling angel, like a pedophile eyeing his first victim. Delighted, he looked at Belinus yet again, a dog glancing at his master for final approval. They could both clearly hear the sounds of battle as Broga darted an intense and hungry look at Mahatiel in dizzying pleasure and disbelief, much like a crack addict does the pipe. Broga began to drool. The spittle fell slowly from his open mouth like clear syrup. It ran lazily down his black cloak and dripped to the ground. Go, join the fray. You have my permission, said Belinus. Capture him, kill him, cannibalize him. I don't care. Or you may send him back so broken-winged and bloodstained that even his creator will be unable to mend him. Either way, go! In one awesome motion and with stunning speed, the man-beast turned and pounded his way toward the huge knot of warring creatures, like a starving animal to a fleeting frenzy. Belinus smiled sadistically. Stupid beast. Ruled entirely by his appetite, Broga was too stupid to see that he was being used. While the man-beast attacked from the front and distracted the angel, Belinus himself would attack from behind. Broga hammered his way through his comrades like a rogue elephant. They parted like the Red Sea before Moses as he tossed and heaved his way through them to get to his prize. Twice their size, none dared say anything as he brutalized a wide path through them, though many cast resentful glares his way. All knew his reputation for savagery, even with their own, and none dared say a word in protest. In brutal fashion, he forged his way through his evil companions right into the thick of the battle. As Mahatiel turned to blunt an attack from his right flank, Broga charged right up to the surprised angel, grabbed him by the throat, and lifted him high into the air. Belinus, in the meantime, circumvented the preoccupied group and unseen began running up behind Mahatiel like a madman. His padded boots ran on air as easily as a child on freshly cut grass, and just as silently. His teeth were bared in a tight, death-like grin, the kind of maniacal grin one sees on a bleached skull. His dark, parchment-colored skin enhanced his evil grin all the more. His cape and cowl were flowing in the ethereal breeze of the spiritual realm like a living thing. He was as silent as a bat on the wing at midnight. He leaped like a panther high into the air, intending to fall like an arrow from hell, blade first, from a great height into Mahatiel's exposed back. He vaulted over his own companions, who watched him in admiring wonder, silently cheering him on with their guttural growls of assent. His leap was high into the air, well above the engaged angel's periphery vision. Chartak Chakaul, whispered the dark thing in pure Hellion speech and great delight as his leader fell toward the angel unawares. Death has wings. Meanwhile, they had all but overlooked the girl. This maddening angel had severely injured so many of their number that now he became their main focus and the object of their venom and their hate. Virginia Sills couldn't believe her eyes. What were those things? They were so ugly, so inhuman. In her horror, she shivered all over, and since she was nearly completely absorbed and reunited with her body, the shiver was translated there. Back in the hospital, Carolyn was charged with wheeling the body down to the morgue. "Oh my God!" gasped the young nurse, wide-eyed, as she saw the body tremble. "She moved! She's alive!" "That's impossible," protested another nurse. A shriek pierced the air of the ER, chilling in its intensity, terrifying in its volume, gripping in its strength. And it came from Virginia Sills.